make eye contact, and we're going to have a great time. So, all right, I'm going to hand things over to Sam, assuming he can be heard.
All right, so we're entering the home stretch here. I'm Sam Wick. I run UTA Ventures. We've made a number of investments in this category, mainly in immersive VR, both in the Void and in Dreamscape. And today we're going to talk about investment trends, like how are investors generally thinking about virtual beings? And I'm excited to have two of LA's most accomplished investors here with me today. To my left, I have Clinton Foy, who's a partner at Crosscut, and right next to him, I have John Goldman, who is a partner at Greycroft and also a partner at Skybound. And between the two of them, their funds have probably somewhere north of $1 billion under management, and they have hundreds of millions of dollars of capital that they've deployed into the sector. And not that you guys need more street cred here with this group, but maybe you could talk about some of the companies that we've seen today or in the sector that you've invested in.
Well, my name's Clinton Foy, and we're the smaller part of that $1 billion. I think Greycroft is a larger fund. We have about $250 million under management, and we're investing out of a $125 million fund right now. We have invested really, I think, in the last, call it 6 years, heavily into the video game space and into the esports space and the streaming space. And I also used to live for about 4 years in Japan and have been following a lot of the trends with virtual influencers, virtual beings coming out of Asia and especially out of Japan. And it's an area that we want to invest more into. Some of the companies I think that we've invested into that are adjacent to the space are in streaming and with streaming influencers and virtual influencers. We recently exited a company and sold a company called Streamlabs to Logitech for about $130 million. And that provided streaming software and streaming tools to streamers and to virtual streamers. And that was a good exit, and it was an interesting exit for us. But we just think that there's so much more potential in what the future holds. And we are continuing to invest into the space, and we're interested to meet a lot of you in the audience and seeing some great presentations today. So happy to talk afterwards.
Wow, Clinton's so polite and thoughtful about this. Jeez.
This is really close, by the way.
It is close.
We're really.
So to your question, so there are three companies here today that I've invested in. I was a small and early investor in Fable. And then I hear that Toonstar spoke earlier. They've had an amazing journey and pivoted along the way into something that's been very successful for them. And then also the Wave, which is now called Wave XR, but they started out as a VR company, and they've had sort of tremendous sort of organic support from music fans. So didn't set out one way or the other, but somehow stumbled into three companies that are leaders in the space. And I'd say I approach it with continued curiosity. Not sure how it evolves as an investment space, but a lot of cool user experiences and companies to interact with.
So today, we saw a number of amazing presentations, but organized primarily around virtual influencers, virtual beings, synthetic humans, tools. But that's not the entirety of this segment, right? Venture investors love B2B businesses. We didn't talk a lot about those today. What are some of the other areas that you're exploring around virtual beings?
Well, I would say I am probably more focused than most around entertainment and content. A lot of investors don't like that area. That is the area I feel most comfortable. But I'd say as a broader firm, aside from my interest areas, the firm is probably more interested in business opportunities, and selling to businesses is something that we want to see sort of traction in 12 to 18 months. So a company that's selling to businesses is in an early market, and an early technology is probably going to have a chance to do that more easily than consumer-focused or entertainment companies.
So on the B2B side, is anyone looking at, for example, at deep fakes or security around deep fakes?
Do you want to talk about that? I mean, I've looked at a lot of, Jason Ostheimer was here earlier, and we were talking about, we've looked at a lot of sort of audio technology companies and got close on a few, but we really had trouble finding, sort of what the moat was, what was defensible. They all seemed relatively similar, so we weren't able to make a decision. And then, of course, we've looked at some advertising-related companies that are trying to speed up how sort of virtual beings can allow you to produce ads more quickly. So I don't know about you. What have you been looking at?
So we've seen mostly, I think, on the consumer side and the direct-to-consumer side, virtual influencers, virtual beings. I think a lot of the companies that are presented today are also more on the consumer side that we've seen. Not so much on the business and enterprise side. There's some partners at my firm. We have 4 partners. I would say 2 or 3 of them look at SaaS businesses, and we haven't seen a lot, I think, in this particular space. And I think we're probably going to see more of a consumer bloom before we see an enterprise bloom, I think, in this space.
So we were talking about during our prep call, a number of the companies that that are either here today or that we know kind of came out of the last wave of VR and AR. And if you have the numbers here, but if you just look at the amount of investment, 2015, $700 million placed into the category. By 2017, it was north of $2 billion. That started to taper off, right? As we start to get more enthusiastic about what's happening in this particular category, like, are there lessons that as investors, right, and as companies that that we can learn from that experience, right, that we can apply to what's happening today?
Well, I think there are a couple things. One, it's important for entrepreneurs to understand some of the characteristics of investors. So investors will put money behind a hot trend early on, just in case it works. So if something pops really big, it's good to be in early. And then what happened in the sort of VR boom that continued for a while is when the consumer adoption or the sale of headsets doesn't really emerge, investors will move on. But there was a good 2 or 3 year period where VR companies were still, coming to events and drinking the Kool-Aid, not realizing that, the wall was coming. And, it's very apparent on the investor side that, there's going to be a wall if there's not adoption of stuff. And so I think what that means is a lesson for entrepreneurs is you do have to be market sensitive, and, you can't will a market into existence or hope it comes into existence because it's so cool.
Right. So do you build these types of companies then to sell? Do you build these types of companies with advertising and media models in mind? As an investor, what do you think about?
Yeah, it's a great question. The technology is so new, the adoption's so new, it's hard to say what the monetization models are right now. I think you're really just looking for that uplift in number of eyeballs watching it, number of consumers who are super excited about it. And you're hoping that monetization is going to come at some point. But I don't think that anybody's got that figured out yet.
But I think there are, again, to your original question of what can you learn from the VR market, if you don't see reach, so if you don't see a lot of headsets out there, as an example, or whatever the example of reach is here, then you can't have an advertising or sponsor-based business. So you can at least eliminate that. That means you probably have a B2B business, or you have to pivot. So I'd say all 3 of the companies I mentioned that I'm involved in pivoted in one way or another. Edward, you were doing a different thing when we first met, and then you moved into a different area, as did the Wave kind of pivoted a bit, and Toonstar definitely did. So that is the biggest lesson, is not to be in your own echo chamber, and And that's just from the standpoint of financing. Like, you know, you don't have to design your entire business around what venture capitalists think, but to the extent that you need money from other people, you should be paying attention to that.
Right. So scale's important, right? IP, right? We've seen, I think, two different approaches here to the marketplace. We've seen a number of companies developing their own original IP, right? Particularly in the virtual influencer space, that seems to be a big area. But we've also seen companies that have tool sets that are actually applying that to existing IP and thinking about how to make that type of IP interactive or more compelling. Is there a model? When you think about those two, is it one or the other? Is there one that's more interesting, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think in the classic venture model, I think creating your IP always has more upside than creating some kind of a platform or some kind of an IP that borrows from somebody else or licenses somebody else. You're essentially, we see this in games a lot, where some game company might want to license an IP from Disney or license an IP from some kind of well-known Hello Kitty character or something like that. But at the end of the day, you're building a brand and you're building brand awareness for that IP. You're not bringing back, I think, value towards that game company. And so I don't think that we would necessarily invest in something that was capped or that brought that much more value to somebody else's IP. That's just, I mean, my perspective. I think there are other investors out there that have gone after license models.
I mean, one of our biggest gaming companies is Scopely, which has done a, mostly a license model, and they've grown a lot. And I think it's sort of a good example of figuring out what's right at the right stage. So at first they started out with very casual games like Words with Buddies or whatever. Then they did, licensed games, and and they've just announced a recent raise, which we participated in, to acquire companies and have sort of original things in the portfolio. So I think maybe it's an ages and stages type of thing, that what's right for the market today. But there's certainly a lot of in Asia in particular, you see virtual influencers that are completely original, and people are really, completely attached to them.
Mm-hmm. So both of you mentioned gaming, and both of you have a deep background and understanding of the gaming marketplace, right? How do the gaming platforms fit in? Either the tools, Unity, Unreal, the publishers, the streaming tools, where does that fit into this economy?
Well, I think the beauty of the gaming space is that you already have a massive number of gamers. You have a massive number of install base already. You have billions of people playing on billions of devices, from mobile devices to console to PC. So you don't have the problem of virtual reality, for instance, where there's only an install base of 10 or 20 million HMDs. And if you only have 10 or 20 million HMDs out there, that's not a big enough market to sell into.
Wish we had that.
If that, right? But if you have literally billions of devices that you can get out to, then that's a massive market. That's a really, I think, exciting, multi-platform kind of universe that you can sell into with games. And the thesis that we have, I think, and that we've been pursuing is that there is probably going to be, I think, a Cambrian explosion of virtual influencers in games, both across streaming, across video, across kind of non-player characters within games. And we're starting to see that already with some of the creative teams that are spinning that up. There's been a long history of that for the last 20 years, and it's only getting better. It's getting exponentially better year by year. As processing power goes up, as number of screens, I think, increase. And so I think probably virtual beings, virtual influencers, AI within games is likely going to be probably one of those platforms, one of those areas that is super exciting for us to invest into.
Right. So things like CAC and LTV, customer acquisition costs, lifetime value, right? We're early, right? You're betting on a gut feel. You're betting on the entrepreneurs. When you sit down, and you have a conversation.
100%. So the way I've started to look at it more and more is that, yes, one, you're for early stage, you're looking at the entrepreneur and the team. Are they doing something that relates to their past history and something that they're truly passionate about, as opposed to we've spotted the next trend and we want to get on this bandwagon? It's really hard to do that. And then two, I'd say the most important thing that I'm looking for now is business design as opposed to product design, because that's the whole point of venture, is to figure out how you turn this activity, whether it's selling shoes or making virtual beings, into something that generates money. And so a lot of times you meet teams that they're product first and they'll hope to figure out the business. I'm looking for somebody that has a business design, and then they're able to explain the product or the creativity within the context of that business. And that's a really hard thing to marry together.
So we're going to move into what's happening in the rest of the world, and in particular in Asia, where I know both of you have spent a lot of time.
So this is not the Prince Andrew discussion?
No, this is not. We're getting your dry sense of humor here. Right.
That is outside the United States.
But before we do, we have a short clip that we want to show, if we could, just to show something that's happening in the Asian market.
朝ですよ。起きてください。ねえ、起きてってば。おはよう。
おはよう。
あ、今日雨が降るかもしれないから傘持って行って。急がないと遅刻しちゃうよ。
行ってきます。
行ってらっしゃい。気をつけてね。
19ページ、商品のラインナップについての。
おかえりなさい。
なんかさ、家で誰かが待ってるっていいもんだな。さっき思ったんだ。帰ってくるとき。おやすみ。
おやすみなさい。
Okay. All right. So what's going on here, right? What are we seeing? What is Gatebox doing?
I mean, so just to add a quick personal digression at the end of the day, since we're like in between you and cocktails, like I just met my older daughter's boyfriend the other night, and I don't really have a problem with that as a general statement, but I actually did find him really irritating.
And he can watch this later on YouTube. It'll be perfect, right?
I could actually see the merits of her, interacting with a, Gatebox boyfriend just to avoid that conversation. But I think this is, you've got a lot of insights on this, Clinton. I think this is pretty real and probably, I guess on a serious level, I think the Pocket Gems or Pixelberry thing, like those are basically boyfriend stories. And I think that people might not think of them in that way, but there's like a number line that connects, choices in episode to something like this. So I think this is not as exotic and crazy as you might think.
Right. So essentially, we saw elements of this presented in different companies today. We saw chatbots, right? We saw virtual companions. Here, it's all kind of tied in, in a way that is getting very close to something like her.
The crazy thing about this video is this is technology that's 3 years old, and that was released in Japan, I think, quite a while ago. And there's a history of dating simulators in Japan, and this is just kind of the closest, newest iteration of it. And so if you went to the Tokyo Game Show this year, or for the last 10 years, you would see on console or on Nintendo devices or on PC devices dating simulators for lonely salarymen in Japan. And it's kind of sad. Actually, what we saw this last year was that there are actually dating simulators for women now. So Japan is kind of exponentially also increasing their problem of dying off as a population, becoming an Asian population that doesn't have sex anymore. And this is part of the problem, or it's part of the solution. I'm not sure what.
So you're going to feed off that as an investor until their population dwindles to zero.
Yeah. They still have deep pockets, though. A lot of money. That you saw, that was 2,500. I think it's actually 1,300 now.
Yeah.
But yeah.
All right, so I think we're coming here towards the end. So I want to thank both of you for taking the time today, and thank you, Edward, for an amazing event today.
Yeah.